But
Jackie, let me ask you this.
sure.
You got a lot of things going on. Why do this? You've done it before, but why do you want to do it again?
Well, I had to resign midterm when my husband got the job covering Galveston for the Houston Chronicle.
Probably a conflict or something.
Yes, because it was a conflict. He would not have been able to cover Galveston if I was on the council, because he would have had to send somebody else to talk about city council issues each time, and so they just would have assigned somebody else. So rather than have him continue to have to drive back and forth from Houston when he could cover the beat here, plus he was interested in it, then I resigned so that he would be eligible to cover that. And now he's retired. And I would like to be able to go back on council and finish my work there, or finish the job, and continue to serve Galveston and serve District 6 on the west end. The district has shifted just a little bit since then, but it makes more sense now geographically. Previously, it was down all the way into Cedar Lawn, but now it covers from 75th out the west end, so geographically it makes a lot of sense. And most of it is also on the water, which is another aspect of District 6, is that an awful lot of it is on the water.
So you're 70, where is it now, 70?
75th
Yeah.
west. So it covers Lake Madeline. It's essentially Lake Madeline West, that subdivision, Dominic, Harbor Lafitte. Yes, exactly. Harbor Lafitte and West.
Okay. You have a question?
Yes, sir.
What's your position on the scattered site housing?
We have, Galveston was required to put back 569 units after Ike. And some of them have gone up in units together. And then we're left with having to, what was agreed upon was scattered housing. So I think that the city is going to be required to build those scattered housing. It makes sense to try to group them as much as possible so it's easier to maintain them. But I don't know that grouping them as much as possible means having a setting of all low-income housing or all subsidized housing. They've found across the United States in different places that when you have mixed income housing working together, that everything benefits. The community benefits, the low income people benefit, and it also makes it easier for everybody to do what they need to do, because a mixed income community will attract transportation, small services, retail, and so on and so forth, so it's easier to live. The scattered housing is going to be a little bit more difficult, and I think that's going to have to be worked out, but I know Galveston is going to be required to build these. It's part of the contract with getting so much money to repair our infrastructure and so forth after Ike.
Talk about public safety.
Yes, sir.
So, and we talked about it a little bit in advance. So, what's your position? I know we talked about the recruiting and retention and getting more officers to come and live on the island and stay here and have a career here. I think the entire city and the business community would benefit from that. What have you done to educate yourself on the issue, and what steps are you going to take going forward?
Excuse me. Well, I've looked at I've gotten a copy from the state of the Pension Review Board thing. I've talked to you all at the Municipal League, and I've began a conversation with Chief Hale to see what it is he needs. I think that's going to be a big part of the issue moving forward, is to talk to the chief to see what he needs in terms of staffing, and also what he feels about the best way for retention. I am supportive and have life experience with public contracts, public service contracts, and so it would be at the same time, I think everything needs to be balanced and fair. So what I would bring to the table is a commitment to having a safe community, a commitment to being open to what needs to have happened to make that happen, and then an ability to look at the situation and decide if it makes sense for us or not. So I don't have any preconceived notions other than being supportive of a safe community and not being adverse to the public service contract situation.
The collective bargaining.
Collective bargaining, right, exactly.
I have a question on.
Yes,
Tourism.
Teresa, yes.
Obviously involved in that industry and also a resident. And so I have heard this sort of, it just seems like there's a conception of the public that the tourism industry is separate than, they cause, extra traffic and those kinds of things. But in reality, we're all members of the public and we are community residents. And how do you feel we could bridge that gap? How do you feel that we could make sure that the citizens realize that the tourism industry is made up of citizens and the benefits of the tourism industry could be promoted to the citizens so that there wasn't that, oh, those darn tourists. The biggest complaint that I've heard is traffic, and that's the biggest complaint the industry would have, I guess.
Yeah.
Just, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, the tourist season is real in terms of the impact that it has on the residents. And it may very well be that what we need to realize is that when the traffic is bad and the tourists are here, that when it's not bad, that we're lucky, that it's not crowded all the time. And so when the off season, when we don't have as many tourists here, it's really just a break as opposed to, oh, the tourists and now we have it bad. Because the Galveston is a tourist destination. And the other thing that I think that we need to realize is that when we make the city a better place to live, we make it a nice place for tourists to come. And when it's a nice place for tourists to come, then it's going to be a better place for the citizens to live. And so we've got to mesh those two things together. And when the traffic is bad for those of us that live here, it's also bad for the tourists. And so we need to try to work on traffic situations and issues. Can we get them out of the cars and into some public transportation so that there's less automobile traffic around? Can we make Galveston more pedestrian friendly? It's going to be a better place to live if we can solve those issues. And so the two issues are really intercombined.
Jack,
VJ.
Listing there of that former church right by your.
Oh, yes. That's yours?
Yes, ma'am. 2 acres in about 8,000 square foot church. With the new zoning change that occurred, which my owner did not know, it's an R1, so it's very, very, very limited. Can put a church back in there, but he's thinking about going back with planning and maybe try to get another usage that would allow a little bit more development. If you got on council, would you have any opposition to that? Depending on what the zoning would be, whether it's retail, commercial, or neighborhood services, or something else.
Well, not in that particular piece of property. I think, what we have to sort of do is sort of figure out when the LDR was done, when those LDR changes were made. There was this wide window of opportunity for people to look at it, talk about it. The communities, it was brought into the communities. Most everybody had a chance. Now, there were places that fell through the cracks, like this one was, where he didn't get the opportunity to check it and make sure that it was zoned a zoning that would benefit a resale. It was zoned as a church, and it abuts some residential there on Stewart Road. That particular piece of property, I think, could certainly, depending on what zoning he would ask for, should certainly be eligible. What we need to be careful about is piecemealing the LDR, I think, as a council. I think it's important whenever we make rules and regulations that we make them for the benefit of the city and then also make sure that they're uniformly applied so that everybody knows what's going on, everybody knows the rules, and you don't get to ask, you don't get favors. So that's a sort of a question that is loaded in some ways, in that I think on that particular piece of property, I know that piece of property, I live it, I know the neighborhood, that's where I am, so I don't see a problem depending on how wide a range he wants for that there would be a problem getting that zoning changed. At the same time, I think we need to be careful as a council just piecemealing what's been decided on as a community.
Jack, I have a question
Yes,
for
sir.
you. I was looking at 3 of the most important issues you wrote down that we face, and one of them was rising insurance prices. Yeah, we obviously don't like that. Now, as our council person, what would you do, or what could you do, do you think, to get that to trend the other way? Or at least stay even?
I don't know. I don't know what's possible as a council person to do. I think we would need to, what we needed, Terrell works in the industry, so she knows a whole lot more, but I think having representation at the state level, being able to talk to people at the state level, being able to talk to people in the insurance business and figure out if there is anything that we can do would be helpful. And then that way begin to try to implement, if possible, some of those things. I think the most important thing that Galveston can do is to not have more claims. The more claims that we have, the more the insurance is going to go up. So how do we not have any more claims? One of the ways that we do that is to make sure that we put into place code enforcements and then enforce those code enforcements that help to prevent and mitigate flood damage and windstorm damage. And so by doing that and then being careful about the decisions that we make about where we allow development and what that development looks like to try to prevent future problems with claims is if we can keep our claims down, then we're gonna keep our insurance down. So in that way, the city council can certainly be proactive in making sure that the strongest code enforcement and so forth gets put out there so that we mitigate the amount of claims. People are not going to like that because it's going to cost more to build. But it's also going to if you have that and you have your buildings built so that you mitigate some of this damage that's going to be or potentially be done, then you save money in the future, both in terms of insurance costs and in repairs and so forth.
Yeah.
So, yes, Terrell.
How you doing? Okay, I know that the LDRs were overhauled after you were on council.
Yes.
About 2015. But one of the chapters is dedicated to PUDs, which are plan unit developments. And if you're not too familiar with it, what it is like, for instance, if you want to develop your property, but need to make some changes to it to be able to make it work. For instance, if I wanted to put a gas station in an R1 district, and I wanted to buy this property, I couldn't do it because in an R1, a service station is not allowed. So I couldn't have a PUD. If I did try it and we voted for it, that would be breaking the rules. But if you have, in a commercial zone, you can have a gas station. And so we just recently, since 2005, have reviewed 9 PUDs. We unanimously voted for 6 of them. We denied one a couple of weeks ago to a gentleman that has a convenience store on Broadway. He tore down a building that was a really ratty building that he started his business in, he tore it down to put in 6 pumps. He followed all the rules. He applied for the PUD. The Planning Commission unanimously voted for it. He had to change his canopy and do all these type of things. Like I said, he spent over $67,000 on the plans. City staff approved it, recommended council to approve it. It came before city council. He even got his neighborhood to sign off on it. He did everything possible. But we denied it because we stated that we just don't want to see any more gas stations on Broadway, let alone it was gas pumps. How do you feel about that? I mean, as a council person, if a person files for a PUD and they've done all the rules, would you let your personal preference get in the way of doing what was legally his right to do as a business on Broadway?
5 minutes.
You got longer to answer.
Yeah,
It's
he's
about
just
5
telling us
minutes.
that.
If you want me to clarify, I'll be more than happy.
That's all right. One of the things the LDRs were trying to, the last set of LDRs was trying to do was get rid of specific use permits. They used to call them SUPs. Now they've got PUDs. And people didn't like SUPs because everything was up in the air. It was too subjective. You could put a lot of money into planning a project and then you either wouldn't get it or it got changed. And the SUPs required a lot of planning, a lot of information in order to say yes or no to it. So they wanted to get rid of those, so they made all of these specific things, but then people weren't able to do what they wanted to do in a specific area. So we had the PUDs came up, I presume, as a balance between SUPs and strict rules that didn't allow any variances at all. I know when, for example, when I built my new building 5 years ago, it was still before the new LDRs, and I had to get an SUP. And it was a little bit nerve-wracking to think that but I bought my property on contingency. I put my bid in on my property contingent on getting approval for my SUP. So it only cost me some planning from the architect and the permit fees and that kind of thing in order to get it put through. And it was reasonable. It was within the allowances of everything. So I can understand the uncertainty of a PUD or an SUP. At the same time, I think we as a community need to be able to say if something is a variance. We go through the process of getting all the rules and regulations down, and then somebody wants a variance, and it shouldn't be a surprise. It shouldn't be a surprise to the city, and it shouldn't be a surprise to the neighbors. And that's what this process allows, is for there not to be any surprises to the people that already live there, who expect something to already be this way. The other thing that happens is that when you have variances allowed, whether it's because of a variance or an SU or a PUD or whatever, then it changes the level playing field. Now, do I think that they shouldn't have them? I think it's okay, but I think it's okay to ask for variances and to have the PUD as a potential, because there may be something fabulous coming down the pipe that we want to put in that doesn't necessarily fit into some place already because we didn't know about it. Didn't have that concept. At the same time, I think that the city should be able to say, no, this doesn't fit into the long-term concept. We appreciate it. We like your business. We wish you were here. We wish you were doing something different. But this does not fit into our long-term concept and our long-term plan for making this a better place. So does that
May I follow up on a question?
sure, so does that answer what you're looking for?
Long-term plan for Broadway yet.
Mm-hmm.
There is no plan.
Yeah.
We are trying to develop one. I serve on the Broadway ad hoc committee. We have not talked about land uses. We haven't done any of that kind of stuff. In fact, the consultant has encouraged us to open up our land uses on Broadway. And actually was in support of adding the gas pumps. So I guess where I was trying to get with that question, if a business that it states that you can have a gas station or gas pumps on Broadway and it's a commercial and you're before city council, if it's still a valid use that you can have a gas pump, and they're assuming that they've gone through all of the processing and the neighborhood has already approved it, he went and got a petition, he got the planning commission up to approve it, he got the city staff to approve it, goes to it just to finalize it, and then the city council member says, well, it's my personal preference, I just don't want to see any more service stations, I don't want to see any more gas pumps, so therefore I don't think we should vote for that. That's more in line with my question is do you think your personal preference, even though it's an allowable use, that you could say no? Or would you say, we'll pass this one, but then I want to change the land uses that will not allow any more gas pumps shops or gas stations on Broadway and make that check a no, and you can't have them on Broadway. Because right now, we don't have that.
Yeah.
There's no rules that say you can't do that. You can have.
Well, I'm just confused as to why they have to go for to go for approval if it's an approved use.
Because the Broadway guidelines that we hastily approved, and we did it in such a quick manner, and that's the reason why Domino's got built, only allows certain curb cuts along Broadway.
Uh-huh.
Just like with Jack in the Box, Jack in the Box would not.
So it wasn't the gas station, it was the curb cuts that made him have to come in with a PUD?
He needed a curb cut, and also too, he was 200 feet from a budding neighborhood.
Mhm.
And all
Okay.
Broadway has a budding neighborhood, but he was required to put a sound wall, so the
Mhm.
neighborhood couldn't even see it.
Mhm.
And,
Well, I certainly think that, people who are elected to city council should have the right to vote their conscience or however their constituents have asked them to vote. I certainly do. That's the reason they're there, because they're the firewall between that and everything else. Otherwise, it would be, if it's part of the thing that says it's allowable, then it should be allowable. But if it's a discretionary, then city council should have the discretion. Yes, I think that's part of being elected. Because it may be a personal thing, it may be what their constituents are telling them, it may be, there's no telling what it is. But what is the old adage? And we're all living with it. Elections have consequences. So, yeah, I do. That's just my own personal opinion.
Any other questions for Jackie? All right, Jackie, thanks for being here. We
You're very
appreciate it.
welcome. Thank you. I'm sure it's been a long day for you all.